the question and answer period similar to what we did in the morning, but we have a few minor adjustments. Many of you see the question cards on your seats, and so as you listen to the presenters and a question pops into your mind, go ahead and jot it down just like you did this morning. But this time, just hold on to those questions, and then just before the question and answer period begins, I will make an announcement that says we will collect the cards now. So that's when I want you to hold them up in the air, and then folks will go around the room and grab them and bring them up to the stage. The other announcement I wanted to make is that we know that we haven't had a chance to get to all the questions, neither yesterday or today, but we do promise you that we're going to do our best to get the answers for you and get them posted on our website. So give us just a little bit of time to be able to do that, and keep coming back to the website periodically to check to see if they're there. We've also had people have asked about the PowerPoint slides that some of the presenters have shown on the screen. Once we get permissions from them, we'll be able to upload them and also put them up on our website so that you can download them and use them. And the last little thing I wanted to mention was that in your goodie bag, some of you probably saw this really neat looking mouse pad, but then when you looked at it, you said, well, I just dropped my Coke. That's okay. What is that? Ever Gumby? What am I? Yeah, always Gumby. So you said, that's really cool. It's got a white rectangle in the middle of it. Well, if you open up the side, you actually can slide in a photo. See? And that's why the saying on the bottom says, family strong, army strong, because it's a photo of your family. Pretty cool, huh? So for those of you that didn't get the goodie bags, then we did transfer them downstairs to to the family pavilion and the AUSA pavilion. Isn't he wonderful? Michael is so good. He reads my mind like you would not believe. Thank you, Michael. So I'm done here. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let's see. This afternoon, we're going to explore the challenges and triumphs of Army families who have experienced the pain of injury and loss, and that would be, of course, our families or our wounded warriors and our surviving families. We are honored to have several family members with us today on our panels and in our audience. But such a special topic really does deserve the very best leadership, so please allow me to introduce our first facilitator of the afternoon, the Commander of the United States Army Warrior Transition Command and Assistant Surgeon General for Warrior Care and Transition, Brigadier General David Bishop.
Thank you, Patty, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm honored to be here today and represent our Surgeon General, Lieutenant General Patricia Horoho, and all of the Warrior Transition Command cadre and staff. I'm also honored to serve as a moderator for our esteemed panel and for all of you today, and I look forward to doing so. As you've just heard, today's theme is Strength Through Transitions. Before I get into introducing our panel members, I'd like to talk briefly about the Warrior Care and Transition Program that the Warrior Transition Command oversees, and then we'll get on with our question-taking and panel member discussion. The Army's Warrior Care and Transition Program is instrumental in care and support and transition for thus far up to 45,000 wounded, ill, and injured soldiers. And we have transitioned 51% of those people back into the force, I'm proud to say. I would say that strength through transition is an especially profound topic, not only for my command, many of whom are here today, but for all of us as we enter into our 11th year of war and face so many soldiers with serious injuries, wounds, and illnesses. So I look out to the audience. I'm glad to see so many soldiers and family members and representatives from all the organizations that are here to help support them. I'd also like to recognize our wounded warriors that are here and their caregivers. If we can give them a round of applause, please. We have a few wounded warriors here today, and I know we have many caregivers here, and we're especially thankful for all that you do. No doubt those of us that are gathered here today share a deep admiration and respect for all of our soldiers and all they do. They've got tough jobs, and we all know that spouses and families actually have the hardest job of all. And I know many of you can attest to that personally. As an Army, we have a sacred obligation to care for our wounded, ill, and injured soldiers and veterans. We at the Warrior Transition Command are inspired to help fulfill this obligation. And we as an Army embrace the responsibility to provide the resources necessary to support and care for our wounded, ill, and injured. The Warrior Care and Transition Program helps ensure that no soldier is left behind by ensuring that all soldiers receive the medical care that they need and deserve. The Army currently operates 29 Warrior Transition units and 9 community-based Warrior Transition units across the Army to include CONUS and Germany. We currently have more than 10,000 wounded, ill, and injured soldiers that are being cared for in these units. And these soldiers all have one mission in common, that is to heal and prepare for transition, whether it's back to the force or civilian life. Each soldier is supported by a triad of care. That includes a primary care manager, a nurse case manager, and a squad leader who work with the soldiers and the families of those soldiers to help manage the care and support that they receive. Now, while at the WTUs, soldiers develop a comprehensive transition plan. Each soldier develops this plan for himself or herself with the support of an interdisciplinary team and, of course, their families, who are very much invited to participate. The soldiers set short and long-term goals that align with the domains of strength that you'll find in the comprehensive soldier fitness model. And as you know, they're physical, emotional, social, family, spiritual, and at WTC we've integrated another one called career because we think it's so important to enabling transition. This CTP is the soldier's roadmap to his or her desired future and serves as the focus of interaction for his daily meetings with his interdisciplinary team and triad of care as they work towards achieving those goals. Now, while our soldiers are focused on recovery, that can put a lot of pressure on family members. So at most WTUs, we provide a Family Readiness Support Assistant, or a FRSA. I'm sure many of you have met a FRSA. Some of you may be FRSAs. These assistants link families to important community agencies and help families solve problems on the home front while they support their soldier and help maintain family resilience. We also have Soldier and Family Assistance Centers, or SFACs, located near most WTUs. The services at the SFACs range from information and referral services, education and career counseling, financial counseling and services, Army emergency relief, referrals, human resource and military benefits, to name a few. The SFACs play a key and pivotal role to supporting our soldiers as they go through the recovery process, and they support the entire family through transition. For our most severely wounded, ill, and injured soldiers, the Army's Wounded Warrior Program, or AW2, assists and advocates for these soldiers, veterans, and their families, wherever they are, regardless of their military status. We have 200 advocates right now working across the country, and they foster independence and connect these veterans and soldiers and families with the local resources that they need to seek greater independence. Now, these soldiers and veterans were all severely wounded, ill, or injured since September 10th, 2001, and they suffer from injuries such as post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injuries, severe burns, blindness, loss of limbs, and spinal cord damage. WTC is very involved also in helping soldiers prepare for and seek future employment. We've got several initiatives going on right now, working with a lot of different partners to help this process help more soldiers. Number one is Operation Warfighter. That's a program that's managed by Office of Secretary of Defense Warrior Care Policy, which provides federal internships for wounded warriors to gain experience and become meaningfully engaged. And right now we've got about 600 soldiers enrolled in that program today, and you can see that in a variety of installations across the Army. Our Army G1 Civilian Human Resource Agency is assisting us with maintaining an AW2 Wounded Warrior resume database that facilitates hiring of our soldiers for federal positions across the Army, and we send these resumes out to civilian personnel action centers at the request of the soldiers, and we're seeing some good movement in that direction. Recently, the Navy, NAVC and NAVAIR, they're our Army Materiel Command Navy counterparts, expressed an interest to Warrior Transition Command to hire our wounded warriors in some of their CONUS installations, and we're engaging them in the next week as well to help facilitate that partnership. The National Chamber of Commerce is also a player with helping wounded warriors gain meaningful employment. We're currently working a pilot with them to engage local chambers of commerce in assisting finding employment for returning service members to their communities. We're also, of course, working with the Department of Labor, and we've got support from them at the local level with their disabled veteran outreach placement specialists and local veterans employment representatives who work with AW2 in the support of National Guard and Reserve Yellow Ribbon programs. And finally, of course, we're working with Veterans Affairs very closely. We work closely with them on several issues. Of course, they support our SFACs that I just talked about with the placement of vocational rehab and employment counselors for soldiers to seek counseling from while they're in the WTUs. We also have AW2 advocates that I've just mentioned, the 200 people that we have. We also have internally resourced transition coordinators who work at each WTU and help build and maintain local networks to assist transitioning soldiers in job search and placement. Now, to help keep our wounded warrior families strong and resilient, WTC will be partnering with the USO soon to offer a program called Oxygen, which is a marriage enrichment course that will leverage, we will leverage in addition to the Strong Bonds program. Oxygen will help couples build resilience in a way that is fun and non-threatening, and we look forward to bringing that online in our WTUs in accordance with our ministry teams across the Army. But even with all the support the U.S. Army currently provides, we can always do more, and we recognize that at WTC. We have a lot of interaction with not only the WTUs and the medical treatment facilities and our partners, but we also talk to the senior mission commanders on a regular basis to find out what the issues are so that we can address them as quickly as possible. I'll tell you that keeping the dialogue open with all of our interested partners, such as you all here today, is key and essential and will help the Army better address wounded warrior care and transition over the many years ahead of this enduring program. Now, we have some great panel members here today, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce them now so that we can start answering your questions. The first one I'll introduce is Major General John Sonny Uberti. He is the Deputy Commanding General for Support for Installation Management Command. General Uberti's command provides many of the services that we leverage in the Warrior Care and Transition Program, like SFACs and Army Community Service, to name just a couple. Thanks for coming today, sir, and we look forward to hearing from you. Our next panel member that we have is Dr. Catherine Mogul. Dr. Mogul is from the UCLA Focus Program and has extensive expertise in childhood mental health and the effects of deployment on families. Welcome, ma'am. Our next panel member is Mrs. Melissa Johnson, the spouse of Staff Sergeant Sean Johnson, a wounded warrior from the Army National Guard. Melissa is also an educator, an experienced volunteer, and is certified with the VA as her husband's caregiver. And our next panel member is Mrs. Kim Gadsden, the spouse of Colonel Greg Gadsden, who was severely wounded in Iraq in 2007 by a roadside bomb while serving as a battalion commander in 232 Artillery. He's the former director of the Army Wounded Warrior Program and currently the garrison commander at Fort Belvoir. Kim is a former military officer herself, as well as an experienced educator, advocate, spouse, and caregiver. So at this time, what I would like to do is join the panel, and we can begin answering your questions.
I'm really glad I get to go first. That way, when the rest of this esteemed panel finishes, you will have forgotten all of my mistakes. Anyway, thanks very much. I really am honored to be here today sharing our story as a Wounded Warrior family. It also gets me out of teaching school to 150 evil 7th and 8th grade students. I kind of feel like I got a little trouble spot right in here. So it kind of might be like class. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, thanks again. As General Bishop said, my husband was serving as a battalion commander in Iraq in 2007 when his vehicle was struck by a roadside bomb. Ultimately, he lost both of his legs above the knee, and he suffered some significant damage to his right arm and elbow. Our family was notified of his injury on May 7th, 2007 at Fort Riley, Kansas. That was on a Monday. By Friday, Greg and I were both at Walter Reed Army Medical Center here in D.C. He was unconscious, and he still had both of his legs. His trip back to consciousness was very scary. He understood who I was, and he knew our relationship, but he had several delusional outbursts in the ICU several days in a row, some of which were violent. His wrists had to be velcroed with restraints to the sides of his bed. He had metal external fixators attached to the tops of his legs, keeping his bones aligned. And although the tops of his legs looked very normal, underneath there were large gaping holes filled with sponges attached to tubes that were draining fluids down into the wound vacs on the floor beneath his bed. He had a feeding tube going through his nose, and all kinds of medicines and fluids dripping into the IV of his arm. We had a rough few days at ICU. Fortunately, just before the kids arrived to see him, his delusional outbursts started to subside. When the kids saw him, and at the time, our daughter was 15, and our son was, yes, one of those evil 7th graders at the age of 13, they were very delighted to see their father and responded and interacted with him super well. Unfortunately, he wasn't out of the woods, and the arteries in his legs started to fail, which caused an immediate amputation of his left leg and an emergency surgery for his right leg, where the medical staff took a vein from his left arm and replaced it in his right leg, trying to save the limb. When the doctor came and told me about the procedure in the surgical waiting room, I told him, "Don't do that again." He said, "What?" I said, "Take a perfectly good working medical body part and put it into an area of known damage and destruction." He said, "Well, it's standard procedure, and your husband will be better off trying to salvage a leg, and he doesn't really need that vein in his arm." I knew we were getting the very best medical care at Walter Reed. We really were. I just had a different opinion about limb salvage than the medical professionals did. And really so did Greg, because as he regained more of his strength, and really this is just a couple of weeks into our whole ordeal, he knew that even though the procedure worked, that leg wasn't right. It still had significant tissue damage, nerve damage, and it wasn't working, and we weren't ever sure it was going to. So he decided to have his right leg amputated. That decision was really a turning point in our recovery. It meant that he wanted to keep moving forward, and we wanted to keep our family moving forward in a positive direction. After the amputation of his right leg, his health turned around dramatically. He was really on the road to recovery within a few hours, and we moved from the intensive care unit up to Ward 57, where the rest of the amputees were recovering. At Ward 57, me and the children took on a very large role as caregivers. His arm was still significantly damaged and was going to take a long time to heal. So he needed help with virtually every activity of daily living: eating, getting his clothes on, using the bathroom, personal hygiene, rolling over in bed. So the children and I had to learn how to help care for him in order for him to be able to be released from the hospital. We learned how to help him get from the bed to the wheelchair, from the wheelchair to the shower bench, from the wheelchair to the car. We learned how to get the wheelchair in the car. We learned how to get the wheelchair out of the car. We learned not to slam on the brakes when there's an amputee in the front seat of your car. We learned all kinds of things. We learned wound care, scar tissue care. We learned lots of things so that we could take our soldier home. And Greg did a great job in his recovery. He learned how to walk on short legs, without knees, on legs with knees, all kinds of different legs in between. So about that time, it was time for me to look for a place for us to live, and fortunately, we were able to move on to a handicap-accessible home in Fort Belvoir. Now, we all moved, but we have never moved trying to make our home handicap-accessible, making sure there are pathways around the house for the wheelchair and parking spaces. One problem in particular was, for the past 20 years, my side of the bed was on the right side, and that was the closest side to the door entering our bedroom. And for Greg to get to his side of the bed, he would have to negotiate a very narrow path with his wheelchair to get to his side. I was willing to move, but I didn't want to, and I made it known. As caregivers, we make a lot of sacrifices for our wounded soldiers. We take very good care of them. So we have to know what our own boundaries are and what our limitations are. So that negotiation ended very peacefully, mostly because he understood all of his sacrifice was to correctly maneuver the joystick on his high-powered automatic wheelchair through that pathway. Others of our negotiations were not so calmly achieved. As you can imagine, this was a very tough transition for us. Lots of things were happening. Half of them you wouldn't believe if I told you, and the other half I don't want you to know. But we got some help. We had to have a lot of help from our family and our friends and our Army family. And what I want to impress upon you today is the help that we got from mental health professionals. I will tell you this one story. The first day that I go in to see our mental health professional, I walk in the door and this guy is wearing a checkered shirt with a polka dotted tie and some very obnoxious colors. And I said to him, "Doctor, I don't know how you call yourself a mental health professional when you are clearly wearing some disturbing combination of shapes and colors." Well, he picked up the phone on the desk and told his secretary, from now on, scheduled double sessions for Mrs. Gadsden. Not kidding. I am kidding, but he would constantly wear that. So when I came, he took his tie off. The help that we received from mental health professionals really helped us get through some emotional struggles that we didn't have any experience with. You guys have moved, and when you move, you got a lot of stuff to get from one place to another. So you call in professionals to help pack up your baggage and put it on the truck and move it to your next location and unpack it and put it where you need it to be. Well, when you have to move emotionally from one place to another, sometimes you have to call in a professional to come in and help you pack up your baggage and move it from one place to another. And it was very helpful for our family. 5 years have gone by and we keep moving forward. The kids have moved on to college. I went back to school to torture other people's children. And my husband, after spending so many hours in occupational therapy, learning how to cook, clean, and do his laundry, hasn't done any of that in 5 years. He has, however, had the opportunity to do 3 marathons on his hand cycle, do numerous road trips of 50 miles or more on his hand cycle, go horseback riding, deep sea fishing, fly fishing. He earned his advanced open water diver certification. He even climbed the Great Wall of China. He earned a master's degree in public policy at Georgetown University, went to the Army War College, got promoted to colonel, won 2 Super Bowl rings, acted in a major motion picture, was the director of the Army Wounded Warrior program for 2 years where he helped hundreds of service members transition, and now he serves as the garrison commander for Fort Belvoir. So I'm going to cut him some slack on that laundry. But as soon as he retires, I'm done folding underwear. Thank you very much for having me. I would just impress upon you, as we think about our soldiers in transition, that every service member in transition and their family are unique, and their problems and needs are unique to them and their family, and we need to understand it as we try to move them forward in transition. Thanks very much.
afternoon. I'm Melissa Johnson, and I'm very grateful and honored to be here today. Thank you to Patty for having me and for Christy Kaufman for suggesting it to begin with. First of all, I've spent 16 years teaching, and my last 8 years were in first grade. So if you guys would come up and sit on the carpet, I would feel so much better. This puts my anxiety attacks at a whole new level right now. But I'm here today to kind of talk to you about surviving and being hopeful and moving forward. Our journey started approximately 6 years ago, and it's only within the last year that I've been able to say that I have that kind of hope and that I'm able to see that there's something beyond what we've been going through. And it's been quite a process for us. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that and tell you about my new project at the end. So thank you again for your patience and cooperation. My husband is Staff Sergeant Sean Johnson, and he enlisted in the Army Reserves at the age of 17, about a week after his birthday. And he's now had 24 years of service. He deployed in support of Operation Desert Storm with the 311th Evac Hospital. He deployed to Hungary, Bosnia in support of Operation Joint Guard, Joint Endeavor in 1997. And he deployed again in 2005 to Balad, Iraq with the 452nd Ordnance Company. He's an ammunition inspector. He has a bag packed at home right now. We're working on his med board, but if he could, he would go. His bag is ready. He was injured in 2005 in Balad. He'd been near several mortar blasts, but there was one that came in about 10 feet from him, knocked him back, did some damage on his C-spine and his neck, was pelted with rocks, lost some of his hearing, lost some of his vision at that time. That was in 2006, and nobody really knew what kind of damage those blast injuries were doing at that time. So he got up and went back to work. He had called me. He said he wasn't feeling real well, but he was going back to work. Within the next week, he had a salmonella infection that developed into a C. diff bowel infection, and he was experiencing 12 to 15 bouts of diarrhea and vomiting for the next 6 months. He was medevaced in and out of Iraq twice to Germany before he finally landed back in the States at a military base here, and started receiving medical care for the C. diff and the salmonella. Now at that time he was calling me. He was 9 hours from home. We had 3 teenagers. I worked full time. He'd been gone for almost a year at that time, and he was calling me and saying, no, he was fine. He was fine. He had a meeting with the doctor. He'd be all right. And as we all know, when they get on the phone like that, they don't tell you the truth. They're not honest. So I knew there was more to it. And I had to get down there and I had to see him. And the first time I saw him, he had lost 50 pounds. He would pull the skin on his arms and it would just hang. There was nothing left of him. He was on a clear liquid diet. He was taking narcotic pain medications and seeing the doctor once every 2 weeks for 15 minutes. And he was told, "You're fine. You'll be fine." That was before they had all of the warrior transition units. It was the med hold at that time. So basically, he'd report for formation and go back and hang out in the barracks by himself, sad and depressed and dark and with narcotics, and started, complaining about some of the health issues he was having. We eventually got him seen at Walter Reed, and because of all of the bowel infections he'd had, they would say the nausea, the vomiting, the headaches, the dizziness, all of these things were normal because he'd been so dehydrated for so long. So at Walter Reed, we were diagnosed, or he was diagnosed, I always say we, you can forgive me for that. He was diagnosed with medically unexplained physical symptoms. And they actually had a brochure on it, because I kind of shook my head, and no, that's what it was. They couldn't explain it, so here you go. He ended up spending 9 months in med hold before he was told that he either could come home and go back to his civilian job, or he could stay in the med hold. At that point, a med board was not an option because they didn't have a box to check for what was affecting him. And the CBHCO program, where he could come home and work for the Army while he recovered, they told him he was too sick. So he came home. He was a lieutenant at a fire department. He was a firefighter paramedic. And within 2 weeks, they were calling me saying, "What is wrong with your husband?" And I was saying, "I don't know, but I'm seeing it too." He failed his paramedic exam. He'd been a paramedic since he was 17. He instructed for 15 years and couldn't pass the exam. Not even just barely failed it, failed it. They were calling and saying he has anger issues. They would call and say he's having trouble with his workmates. What can you do to help us? And so he was coming home, and I'd come home from work. I had 3 teenagers, and then I'd be counseling my husband on top of it for you can't behave this way at work, you can't behave this way at school, do your homework, you have to turn this in at work. And it took almost a year and a half because we were able to start with the VA healthcare system because he was still on a reservist but not on active duty. We started with the VA, and it took a year and a half of me continuing to say something is wrong, he's not right. This is not the man that I sent. And I don't know what's wrong with him, but I know that he's forgetful, he's angry, he's spiteful, he's mean. The man had never had a sick day in his life. In fact, if I called in sick, he would call home and chew me out for being homesick because I needed to be at work. And I'd say, I have 60 sick days, you can take one. And he'd say, no, you need to be at work. So here he was losing his job, and within a year he had lost his job at the fire department. He had to take a medical retirement. And finally, in the spring of 2008, he was diagnosed with a moderate TBI, and he was diagnosed with PTSD. And throughout the course of the period between the blast in 2006 and the end of 2008, he lost the majority of his vision. He currently has some vision in his right eye, doesn't pick up any signals on the left side. And we've spent the last almost 4 years having to go to appointments and insist that he's not making it up, that it's real, that a TBI can cause migraines, that a TBI can cause vision loss, just some of the common misconceptions. Now, another layer to our difficulties is we live in South Dakota. We are largely a National Guard and Reserve state. We are the largest veteran population in the country per capita, which, per capita, we're pretty sparse, but still. We have a VA clinic in town, which has just a couple of providers. We have a VA hospital 3 hours from us. Our nearest military facility is 6 hours away. It's an Air Force base. And our nearest Army base is 9 hours from home. So when we started the med board process, I had 3 teenagers. My husband couldn't drive. And I had to take all this time off work. And I was constantly, because if you've dealt with any of these healthcare systems, it's a matter of, well, we need you here Monday. And so I'd go to my boss and go, I'm really sorry, but I need a substitute on Monday. And I'm going to be gone Tuesday. Oh, and they just added an appointment. I'm going to be gone next Monday and Tuesday as well. And then I was driving him. I was transporting him. We had just countless issues from being remote because we had to deal with our local unit. And they weren't very supportive. There was a lot of issues with, we don't want your wife to have to travel with you. We don't want to pay for orders. We were told at one point in time that he could drive himself. And when I called back and said he's legally blind, he doesn't have a driver's license, they made him show his ID when we got there, and they copied it because they didn't believe him. So the problem we see, and I've heard this from several other National Guard and Reserve families that I work with now, is we're remote. We're out there. We're by ourselves. Where do you go? I'm surrounded by civilians. The band of brothers that he had and the FRG that I volunteered over 5,000 hours with my FRG. My children combined, 3 children, over 7,000 volunteer hours with the FRG over 7 years. And you're left hanging, partly because they don't want to hear, they don't want to know what happened, and partly because they don't understand. Our families didn't understand. His own mother has told him several times, when are they going to fix your eyes? To the point that he actually told her this spring when he went to blind rehab for the 2nd time that they were going to give him a transplant. And she actually believed him. So then I had to explain that no, he wasn't really getting a transplant. They were just going to do rehab and learn to do the cooking and the cleaning and the laundry and all of those things, which again, he's not doing. But will remind me when I get home that I've been gone for 3 days and there are dishes and laundry to be done. So at this point, my husband has a moderate TBI. He has PTSD. He's legally blind. He has depression issues. He has anxiety issues. I'm very fortunate to be here for 3 days. We have done deployments before. We've done AT training. We've done weekend drills. I mean, he was gone for 2 years in 2005, 2006. This is not a big deal. But for him, 3 days is life-threatening. When he came home from blind rehab this spring, we switched. This winter, he was isolating. He was depressed. He spent all of his time in the basement. We never interacted. We've gone from being a wife and a partner to a caregiver. And he feels good because we spend all this time together, and I say, I don't know where that happened. Now he came home from blind rehab, we are always in the same room. And I mean to the point, if I move to the bedroom, he will pick up his things and move with me. So for him to be home for 3 days is miraculous. Our son is home, he's 22 years old. All of our kids have stepped into that caregiving role, which is amazing because I'll tell you what, 3 or 4 years ago, that man was not a nice person to be around. And everything I'm saying today, he's heard me say, so please don't take that the wrong way when I speak about him that way, because I love him and I admire him and I would do anything for him. But he was a completely different person before he got medication, before he had inpatient PTSD treatment. He's always been a mild-mannered, faith-based person, and he was mean, he was angry. He was seconds away from being physically abusive on more than one occasion before we got him treatment. And so one of the things that I really try to promote is get that mental health care. Get it for yourself, get it for them. There are things that can help. One of the biggest things for us is he was able to get in, after his PTSD inpatient program, he was able to get into a therapist who allowed me to come into his appointments with him at his request. And I said, I'll leave anytime you want me to. I was able to get a lot of insight to the things that he experienced. If you've never heard your spouse say to you that they wished they were dead, that after 15 years as a paramedic, I know every way I possibly could to kill myself, and I know which ways are good and which ways won't work. If you've never heard that, there are no words for how that feels. And I say that as a couple who've always had a strong marriage. Even through all of this, we've never even mentioned divorce. Maybe thought about it a few times, but we've never mentioned it. It's not a matter of our marriage not being strong or our family not being strong. He says in therapy, it's the things he's seen. It's the things he's done. It's the places he's been in his life. And he gets to this dark place where he's worthless and he's useless. And he's no good to the Army. And he's no good to the fire department. And what's he supposed to do now? And so we talked with the therapist, and I said, I want to go back. That's all I was clinging to, was I just want to go back to the way it was. I want to go back to my job. I had a full-time teaching job. I really loved my job. The kids are now moving on. I don't want to stay home all the time. And she said to me, what if this is it? And it just kind of stopped me in my tracks. What if this is it? What are we going to do? We have 40 or 50 years of our lives left. And as I look around, we have veterans and families who have 60 or 70 years left of their life. What if this is it? Last spring, I made a connection with Brandon Vines, the founder of FamilyOfAvet.com. And if you haven't checked it out, I invite you to check out FamilyOfAvet.com. I have cards on the table. I have cards with me today. I wrote on their Facebook wall, and she responded within an hour. This was at a time in my life when my father was dying. We'd been on hospice care for 2 weeks. And my husband, and I say this without being critical of him, was saying things to me like, once your dad is gone, you can get back to taking care of me. And that's because of the TBI and the PTSD, not because of who he is. And if I ever repeated to him that he had said things like that to me, it would break his heart. And I got a response. And I joined Family of a Vet. We're a grassroots organization. We have 343 volunteers. Even our president, all of our staff, unpaid volunteers. We work 10 to 12 hours a day at times. We work around the clock. Someone will answer the phone at 3 in the morning. We are in 46 states and 5 countries. And what we provide is support, resources, education. That been there, done that, real world education on what does it look like to live with someone who has PTSD? What does it look like for your children? We have packets, educational packets. What are you going to say to your teacher to explain why your child is behaving the way they are when it's out of character, but they're living in this world that's messed up at home? They don't understand why dad or mom or grandma or grandpa, whoever it might be, is the way they are. They're living with a veteran who has issues. We have real world information on TBI. What does it look like to have a brain injury? Because by God, when I read that checklist, I went, yep. I wish I would have had that in 2007. I would have known exactly what I was looking at. And so what we try to do is advocate, be a voice, offer that support. And like I say to people when they call me and apologize, it's the first thing they do. I'm so sorry to call you. Say, I didn't have anybody to call 6 years ago. There was nobody there answering the phone for me. I'm glad to answer the phone. I don't care if it's 3 in the morning. What's going on? And just letting them know that someone's there and someone cares. We have online support groups. They're secret groups. No one can see what you say. So we can ask questions about domestic violence. We can ask the questions about suicide, about regrets, about guilt. We can ask the questions about sex, which makes everybody laugh, but in PTSD TBI world, it's a very different animal. We're asking those tough questions and trying to be advocates for one another. We're not professionals. I don't have a degree outside of elementary education and special education, but I have lived with it for 6 years. And when someone says to me, did you feel any regret when you had to leave your job? Were you angry? I can say, boy, I was angry for 5 years. And honestly, I got a lot more done when I was angry than I do now. Acceptance is really for the birds sometimes. But what if this is it? What if he never gets any better than he is today? Can we live that way? Can we enjoy it? He's now doing tandem cycling. He's got a guide dog. We've had different speaking opportunities. We've had travel opportunities, things that we never would have had previously, and we're just trying to embrace them. When we talked about this, he told me 2 things. He said, 1, don't insult the Army. Please, for the love of God, don't insult the Army. And 2, you need to go do this for you. I can give you 3 days. And he's limited his calls to 3 or 4 times a day. Get his anxiety under control. But we're making it. We're making small steps. And now when people see him, they say to me, wow, he's a lot different than he was last year when I saw him. And that's priceless to me. It's a learning curve. It's a learning experience. And I know I'm running out of time here. We're probably way over on time, which is amazing because I didn't have to use my notes. Apparently I can talk. I just want to encourage everyone, check out Family of a Vet or other organizations like it. What we're finding is that military spouses and families and veterans from all eras are getting connected. We're sharing information, we're sharing resources, and we're offering support for people like Sean and I who are in South Dakota who don't have anyone nearby. It's really nice and reassuring to know that you have someone out there who's been through what you've been through. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Catherine Mogul, and I'm a psychologist at UCLA. And I have had the wonderful, good fortune of being able to work with amazing people who are trying to put together more and more programs for our wounded warriors, our wounded, ill, and injured folks, and families in particular. And both of Kim and Melissa's story these are stories that I hear a lot, the similarities in them. And the great thing, I think, is that these guys here, these ladies and their families have been able to grow and restore their parenting and restore pieces of their relationship and have a look towards the future. And I think that's what our programs are all about. The other piece that I think is really important that you both talked about is the importance of the family support, whether that's your immediate family, whether that's getting connected to your Army family, getting connected to your biological family, however you define family. And I so appreciate that you both have really taken that just illustrated that point for me. So I want to talk a little bit about the importance of looking at all perspectives for our wounded, ill, and injured families. So we hear a lot from service members, and we hear a little bit more from spouses than we do from our kids. And I have the unique perspective of having been able to work with lots and lots of kids and hearing their stories. So I want to, since this is a family panel, just want to make sure the kids' stories are a little bit represented here as well. So I'm going to share a few stories that I think that highlight some of the different perspectives of each family member, both from a mother's point of view, a father's point of view, and a child's point of view. I don't know where the clicker is, so next slide. So I want to, this is just one of the stories that we've heard. It's a mother who is 1 month post-reunion after her deployments. And so she says, it's the craziest thing. For the first few weeks after I came back, every morning my 5-year-old would stop me at the door and hang onto my leg and wouldn't let me leave. I had to change out of my uniform and get into civilian clothes before she would let me leave the house. Even now I have to sneak out of the house with my uniform in a paper bag and change on the way to base. So this is a mother's point of view, thank you, but it's also, I think, highlights sort of her perception of what's going on for her child. So it really highlights the importance of that there's reminders happening, not just for our service members that are returning home with PTSD, but there's reminders that are coming up every day in everyday life for our spouses and our children. Here's one just straight out of the mouth of a child, a 10-year-old. Sometimes my dad gets so touchy, like we were getting ready to go to the beach and we were putting stuff in the car, and then he just got so bossy and mean. He yelled at me, and I yelled at him because it wasn't fair, and then we ended up not going. But usually he's really nice. So here we have a child who's noticing a change in his father, and I think a lot of the spouses and their service members bring to me that somewhere along the line they may have actually been told not to talk about their injury with their kids. And one of the things that I see because I work with these kids is that they notice. They notice if it's something subtle like this, just maybe some kind of grouchiness in their parent on the way to the beach or on the way to a park. And sometimes it's even a little bit more noticeable, right? It's like some hyperarousal or hypervigilance. And when we just pretend it's not there, I think we're doing our children a big disservice. One more, I'm going to warn you, at least for me, this next one is a little bit hard to hear. A 26-year-old father, if my daughter falls asleep when I hold her and suddenly her head falls, I can't describe what it does to me. I immediately wake her up, and I'm convinced at that moment that she is dead. So one of the things we know just about babies in general is they like to sleep and they need their sleep, and there's that rule of thumb of never wake a sleeping baby, right? So imagine what this child, what her kind of coming into the world is like, being constantly awakened by her father, but the anxiety that's going on for this dad, that he's actually having that reminder so intensely in that moment, and how that's going to affect their relationship over the course of time. And it's not that it's all negative and it can't be overcome, but when we just sweep it under the rug and we don't attend to it, I think there's a cause for bigger challenges there. And I think both what Kim and Melissa said about getting help, reaching out, is so important, because I really think that many of our families still are a little bit fearful about getting help, particularly for things like a TBI or PTSD. But it is affecting their families, and it's coming forward in these sometimes subtle ways and sometimes less subtle ways. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that we have done in our programs to help our wounded, ill, and injured families. We have several different programs. The main military program is called Focus, Families Overcoming Under Stress. And some of you may have heard of us. We have several different services for all kinds of military families, not just our wounded, ill, and injured. And we are at over 26 installations, I think. So if you were at an installation where we are, you've probably heard of us, but I know a lot of you probably aren't at installations where we are. And so I'll talk about some of our distance programs too as we move on. But I think one of the things that has been most helpful for our parents, and I already alluded to this, is this concept of injury communication. So we can actually take the core components of what is most helpful to kids for them to hear, and most helpful for the spouses and the service member to say to their kids, and really organize it for families and give them sort of a how-to, a step-by-step guide on what you need to think about. And this idea of not just sweeping it under the rug, actually talking about it and sharing your story with your kids, not in a way that's overwhelming, but in a way that's informative for them, and also gives them a sense of hope. So we know with our injuries that there is an expectable course of recovery. Families do recover. They may not ever go back to the way it was, but they can look forward. And getting everyone on the same page with that, to where they can talk about it and say, for example, we help some of our service members use the language flare-ups, because they feel a little bit more comfortable talking about, like, I just had a flare-up today. And the kids use it too. So they now say, like, Mommy had a flare-up or Daddy had a flare-up, and that was the clue to them to maybe, go do something else, or maybe just to come up and hold their parent's hand at the moment, whatever it is. Not that the kids are taking care of their parents, but they know what to expect because they've talked about it as a family. It's also very normalizing to just say, oh, I had a flare-up, right? That's a lot easier than to say, well, I have this thing called PTSD, and here's what's going on in my brain right now. So really helping, I think, parents, and this isn't something that just Focus can do. I think every service provider in this room can help their families to do this. Think about what to look for. What is it that's happening? What behaviors are happening at home? How are our relationships impacted by these flare-ups or these multiple appointments, or the fact that now we can't take walks to a loud place? Whatever the effect is on the family, and have them problem solve around it and communicate about it. So a big thing, and I think, Melissa, you got at this, a lot of spouses don't know what to look for, and they might be given a checklist, like here's the symptoms of PTSD, it's hyperarousal, but what does it actually look like in day-to-day life? And I think if we can train all of our service providers, our family service providers, to be more aware of not just also what the checklist is, but how to put that in regular language that we can all understand, it helps our spouses to recognize when these symptoms and signs are having a flare, when they're having a flare-up, right? And then giving them the what to do about it. So where can I go for help? Can I reach out to our military service providers? Can I reach out to my husband's command? Where can I go for this if I'm noticing these signs and symptoms? And that's, I think, a big challenge. Interestingly, we've had a lot of families coming in where the service member is actually upset because he or she has really clear symptoms, but they're not sure what to make of it, and when they go to their medical clinics, they're being told, well, yes, you have nightmares and flashbacks, and yes, you have hyperarousal, and you have all of these things, but they're being told, oh, it's just an adjustment disorder, which I think is a huge disservice. And what's happening is our service providers have heard that service members are sensitive and don't want to have a diagnosis, but it's affecting these families who maybe it would really be helpful to have a diagnosis. So our service providers are tiptoeing around it, and then we're doing a disservice for our families who could actually take steps if they had an appropriate diagnosis. Next slide, please. I'm sorry I left that up there. So the thing that I really want to think about and impose on, again, every service provider here today is how can all of our systems of care adopt a family-centered approach. So I don't care if you're a dentist, a pediatrician, a teacher, a VA healthcare provider. We need to be thinking about the entire family for our military families, and particularly for our wounded, ill, and injured families, because these things are impacting them. The VA healthcare decisions are impacting the children, and it may not seem as obvious when you're sitting at the VA and you're kind of have 20 patients waiting to see you, but the truth is it is impacting our families. And I think there's a lot of research that talks about, if you picture a triangle, there's a lot of research that talks about how parents affect their kids. So you can look at all the child literature, and it will say, the parents are the protective shield, and if the parents aren't faring well, it affects the kids. But more and more, there is research coming out, and we know this, as human beings we know this, that it's actually how the kids are doing and how the spouse is doing affects the service member too. And so for medical providers to really have that in mind, like, yes, this service member is my patient, but if I can get his or her kids functioning better, his spouse functioning better, if I can get them functioning as a family unit a little bit better, if I can get them communicating, self-regulating, then actually my service member patient is going to do better as well. And I think that's just a message that we need to kind of keep hitting home over and over and over again. The other kind of theme that I hear a lot is that parenting does need to be restored following an injury and the aftermath of injury. So there's the communication piece about the injury, but there's also just realizing that I can still parent. I'm still a very important member of this family, and I have a relationship to my kids, and I don't necessarily need my spouse to do everything, all of the parenting. In fact, most of our service members want to continue in their parenting role and really want to work on restoring that. So we really teach them the skills that help them to do that in an emotionally regulated way. And I guess just related to emotional regulation too is this concept that, again, I think both Kim and Melissa got at this, but helping our spouses who are becoming the caregivers, who are becoming the ones who are trying to help their service member self-regulate, also help them get to their appointments, also help them talk to the kids and restore parenting. That how to advocate, and I don't mean advocate in like the legal sense, any of that. I mean, what are the steps that it takes to advocate for your family? And so how do you stay calm when you're calling whatever system you're calling and you're on hold for 2 hours? How do you stay calm when you've gone to your doctor and you've said, I really think I have these things, and they make a medical decision or encourage you to make a medical decision that you're not comfortable with? So how do you stay calm? Because that's the first step, right? If we're not staying calm, then we're probably not really doing a good job of communicating. So if you can stay calm and neutral and understand what's happening in your body, I know this is like how we describe it to kids, but it's actually true for adults too. If you can learn to stay calm in your body so you can keep a rational head, you can actually then tell your primary care physician, you can tell your son's teacher, you can tell whomever, your spouse, what it is you really need and what's going on for you. And then you can use those assertive communication principles, iMessages, all of these things that actually we use in our couples model are actually good for just anyone. It's whether you're at work, whether you're navigating a medical system, or whether you're at home with your family. So really this blend of emotional regulation, communication, and being aware of your needs. So the other thing I want to just comment on is obviously I'm trying to really push this systems of care, taking a family approach to systems of care. But that also has to happen through more support groups. So we've heard that there may be only one support group a month, or actually at JBLM I understand there's 2 support groups a month. But if I have to go to my child's new school orientation, or my husband has a medical appointment in that moment, I'm not going to be able to get there. So we need these things to be more readily available. By the way, twice a month is actually pretty good. Like, that's better than what I've heard at other places. So I'm trying to suggest that it's not. But more support groups, more information out there about injury communication, and more access to not only mental health, but for the service member, the spouses, and the kids to better understand the injuries, what's going on, what's our new course, where are we going from here as a family. So next slide, please. Oh, I have it, sorry. There we go. Actually, I'm going to move on from this one, but quickly we do have a program on the internet called Focus World, and it's resiliency training for families at a distance. So families actually go online and do activities together, but they do it online. So it also has downloadable activities you can do in your home, in your living room, videos, things like that. And the really great thing about Focus World is Steve Koza's group has done an adaptation of Focus World for combat injured families, and I know he's doing a lot of work to better understand the needs of our combat injured families, so I encourage all of you to get in touch with him as well. But for those of you that are located at these installations, we do have Focus resiliency trainers available, and we also do in the LA Basin for California National Guard families. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with us if we can serve you, even if we can brainstorm about ways to better serve your regiments, your groups, your family readiness officers, because part of our mission is really to go out and train other providers, pediatricians, service providers, everyone, on the unique needs of our military families and our wounded, ill, and injured families.
Well, good afternoon, and on behalf of Lieutenant General Ferreter and Command Sergeant Major Rice and our great team at Installation Management Command, it's a pleasure to be here on this panel and be in the company of such great folks. You know, we hear our chief say in part, you know, the strength of our Army is our soldiers, and the strength of our soldiers is our families, and I don't think no place can you see that more than by these two great Army families, as told by Ms. Kim Gadsden and Ms. Melissa Johnson. So thanks for sharing with us and showing us what the strength of our soldiers really is about. Two great Army families. So as General Bishop mentioned, we're partnered with a bunch of folks through the Warrior Transition Command and MedCom and other service providers in the Army to ensure that we're providing the support that our wounded, ill, and injured soldiers and their families need and deserve through the many transitions that they go through. As you heard both Kim and Melissa recount, that each of these transitions, each family is unique, each family member is unique, and the way they handle each of those transitions is unique. And so our goal is to make sure that we're providing the services or access to the services to help our wounded, ill, and injured and their families make it through those transitions successfully. One of the couple things I wanted to hit on based on some of the comments that both Kim and Melissa made. So reaching our geographically dispersed, and it's not just our Guard and Reserve soldiers. And so many of you have experiences with how hard it is to reach out to the geographically dispersed, whether it is one of the members of our Guard and Reserve, like the Johnsons who live in South Dakota, or if it's an active duty family where the family member has, or the family has returned home to their hometown while the service member is deployed. So a number of programs out there to help connect with our geographically dispersed through Army OneSource, which is a 24/7 access portal. It has the access to the services. In some cases, you can get the service provider right through Army OneSource. We also have community support coordinators as part of Army OneSource that are working in communities that are not supported by military installations to help garner support in 4 major areas: faith-based, financial, spiritual, and behavioral health. And so they're working with community leaders and organizations to try and get providers in those 4 areas to understand the unique challenges that not only that our military families and military service members face, but also especially the wounded, ill, and injured. In fact, many of the behavioral health providers that we've connected with are taking advantage of the invisible wounds of war training, all 3 parts, to help them better understand the population that they may not be used to connecting with on a regular basis. We've also positioned in our family assistance centers with the National Guard about 381 personnel around the country to help, again, connect those geographically dispersed through the Family Assistance Center. So if you have a Family Assistance Center nearby where you're living or recovering, if they can't provide the service, they can put you in contact with someone that can be the service provider for you. The other thing I want to highlight, an item that General Bishop mentioned, is the Soldier and Family Assistance Centers. So the Installation Management Command and the garrisons, really, the garrisons are responsible for running the Soldier and Family Assistance Center at those places where we have a Warrior Transition Unit. And the goal of those Soldier and Family Assistance Centers is to provide the environment that our wounded, ill, and injured and their families need to get the services as they go through these transitions. And one of the services we offer is childcare. So to allow the family members to allow the spouse to attend appointments with their soldier and have somebody to take care of their children and not have to be concerned with find and care every time an appointment comes up. The Garrison Commander works very hard to integrate all the services that are provided on the post, not just Army services. So they work very closely with the VA benefits coordinators, Social Security Administration, Small Business Administration. Many of these in our larger SVACs have permanent offices. And so the Soldier and Family Assistance Center is really designed to be close to that warrior transition unit, and if it happens to be also at a place where there's a medical treatment facility, that ideally that would all be located in the same kind of campus area. Not always physically possible, but that's the concept. And so we have an SVAC, every place we have a warrior transition unit. General Bishop also mentioned the triad of care. There's also a triad of leadership. And that triad of leadership is the medical treatment facility command,